The sound came first. A quiet snap in the leaves, too slow and deliberate for any animal. Elias lowered his breath as the forest seemed to hold its own. Through the lens, a shape drifted between the trees, almost graceful, almost wrong. He steadied his hands, expecting the familiar outline of a deer. But the figure paused, as if listening to him from far away. Then it turned. The eyes that met his were not the eyes of a creature born in these woods. They were aware, searching, almost pleading. A cold shiver crept up his spine as the wind fell silent around him. The forest felt watched, weighed down by something ancient and waiting. Elias blinked once, and the figure stood a little nearer, though it had never moved. What kind of being steps forward without sound? And why did it seem to recognize him? The lens fogged with his breath, and when he wiped it clean, the figure was gone, leaving only the stillness of the trees and a question that tightened like a knot inside him. The authorities moved through the forest with quiet steps, their radios silenced, their voices low. Mara felt the weight of the hunter's story pressing on her, a heavy echo that refused to fade. The ground was undisturbed except for a single line of crushed leaves leading nowhere. She knelt beside them, sensing something deeply wrong. Nothing in these woods walked with such precision, leaving marks that suggested movement, yet revealed nothing of its direction. The silence was thicker here, as though the forest itself held its breath. She wondered what Elias had truly seen, whether the look he described was fear, recognition, or something far older. But one thought returned again and again. Whatever stood before him had chosen to be seen. Locals gathered by the old trading post, whispering as Mara and Lionel approached. Stories drifted between them like smoke, warnings about an unseen watcher that roamed the valley long before any of them were born. Lionel listened carefully, recognizing fragments of a tale he once dismissed as rural superstition. The wind shifted, carrying a sense of forgotten memory, and he felt a quiet dread forming beneath his calm demeanor. These people weren't repeating legends for fear or entertainment. They spoke as though recalling something they had learned to survive. Mara exchanged a glance with him, the kind that needed no words. If the past lingered here, it was not as a story. It was waiting. The missing person's marker had been there for months, ignored by many who walked the trail. But today, it felt different. Sophia studied the torn edge of a flannel sleeve caught on a branch, its fibers stretched as if pulled in two directions at once. She sensed the presence of someone who struggled, someone who ran without looking back. The forest had reclaimed most of the evidence, but not all of it. A faint indentation in the soil suggested a body had fallen here, or been dragged. The air seemed colder, the shadows deeper. Something had happened in this spot. Something connected to Elias's sighting. Something the forest had tried to hide but failed. The mark on the tree was the first undeniable sign. Lionel brushed his fingers across the carving. 3 intersecting lines forming a symbol he recognized from forgotten manuscripts. The grooves were fresh, cut with purpose. Mara watched him closely, seeing the unease settle into his features like frost. Elias stood a short distance away, silent, staring at the forest as though expecting the figure to reappear. The wind swept through the clearing, and for a moment it sounded like a whisper, urging them deeper, daring them to understand. The symbol seemed both a warning and an invitation, a message meant for someone who knew how to read it. None of them wanted to admit that it felt personal. The tracks stretched ahead like a path drawn by an unseen hand, each print too long and too narrow, pressed into the soil with unsettling precision. Mara led the way, her breath steady but her steps cautious, as she followed the trail deeper into the valley. Elias walked behind her, his eyes darting from tree to tree, as though expecting the figure to emerge from any shadow. Lionel paused often, studying the marks with a scholar's careful dread, noting the unnatural spacing between each step. The forest grew darker as they descended, the air colder, as if they were moving not into distance but into memory. The deeper they walked, the more it felt as though the woods were closing in around them. Every now and then a branch snapped far off the trail, never close, but never far enough to ignore. Something was pacing them, Mirroring their steps with quiet intent, Lionel unfolded an aging manuscript on a flat rock, its pages yellowed and fragile, the ink faded yet unmistakable. The drawing showed elongated silhouettes moving through an old mountain settlement, figures neither fully human nor wholly animal. Mara leaned closer, sensing Lionel's unease grow with each page he revealed. Elias watched from a distance, unable to shake the feeling that the forest around them resembled the drawings far too closely. Lionel read aloud the brief notes. Warnings carved by settlers who fled this valley more than a century ago. They described creatures that mimicked human movement, but avoided language, beings that watched rather than attacked, until provoked. A cold breeze swept across the rock, lifting the brittle pages just enough to make them flutter like failing wings. It felt less like discovering folklore and more like uncovering a report left behind by frightened witnesses. The abandoned campsite appeared without warning, a clearing so silent it felt preserved by fear alone. A collapsed tent lay twisted on its side, fabric torn in uneven strips. Pots and tools were scattered in a half-circle, as though dropped mid-flight. Mara crouched beside a dented lantern, her fingers brushing ash that was still faintly warm. Elias felt a tightness in his chest as he imagined someone fleeing into the night, leaving everything behind. Lionel studied the surrounding trees, noticing scratches etched in spirals around the trunks, deliberate and unsettlingly consistent. The arrangement of the objects suggested not chaos, but interruption, as though the occupant had been taken before they could fully react. A hush settled over the clearing in the forest, seemed to listen as they pieced together the silent remnants of fear. The witness stood trembling near the fire pit outside the ranger station, shifting from foot to foot as if ready to run at any moment. His voice cracked as he described a figure stepping from the tree line the night before. Tall, pale and moving with a strange, deliberate rhythm. But it was the final detail that chilled Mara. He insisted the creature spoke a single word, whispered in a voice that barely seemed human. Lionel pressed gently for the exact sound, but the witness could only repeat it with shaking lips, a whispered syllable that echoed faintly in the cold evening air. Elias listened, unsettled by how similar it felt to the silent look the creature had given him through the lens. The witness wiped his brow, glancing repeatedly at the forest, as though fearing the creature had followed him here. When they returned to the ranger station at dawn, the witness was gone. His chair lay overturned, and a thin trail of disturbed pine needles led toward the woods before vanishing completely. Mara felt a cold dread forming as she imagined the man wandering alone into the dense forest. Elias replayed the witness' trembling words in his mind, each repetition sharpening the sense that they were dealing with something that understood far more than it revealed. Lionel studied the ground carefully, noting the absence of footprints or signs of struggle. The quiet was too complete, too intentional. It felt as though the forest itself had swallowed the man in silence. Mara closed her notebook slowly, her expression hardening. This disappearance was not random. It was a message. Elias waited until they reached a quiet bend in the trail before he finally spoke. His voice trembled slightly, as though wrestling with something he had tried to bury since the first encounter. He confessed there was more on that morning than he had admitted. Another moment he had kept hidden. After the creature vanished, he said he found something lying on the cold ground. A piece of torn fabric stained with dark, dried patches that weren't from any animal. He had pocketed it out of fear that no one would believe him. Fear that the truth would only deepen the confusion already clutching his mind. Mara listened without judgment, sensing the weight he carried, while Lionel leaned closer, curiosity turning gradually into dread. Elias explained how the fabric seemed deliberately placed, almost as if someone meant for him to find it. The forest grew still again, holding their silence like a secret. At the ranger station, Sophia laid the burnt remains of a camera strap onto a metal table, its edges curled like blackened paper. The scent of charred plastic clung to the air, refusing to fade. Elias recognized the texture instantly. his own strap, the one he thought he had misplaced. The burn pattern was uneven, almost surgical, as though exposed to intense heat in very specific points. Lionel examined the fragments with gentle precision, tracing the melted arcs with the tip of a gloved finger. Sophia explained how she found the pieces near a shallow fire pit deep in the woods, a place rarely visited by hikers. Mara looked from the strap to Elias, reading the shock settling into his expression. The discovery raised a question none of them wanted to voice: who had taken the camera from him, and why had they tried to destroy it? Lionel unrolled a brittle, oversized map across the hood of the patrol truck, its corners weighted down with stones to keep the wind from folding it shut. The map showed forgotten hunting grounds, old trails scratched out with thick ink, and a shaded region marked with a faded warning symbol. Mara studied the outlines carefully, noticing how the forbidden area aligned almost perfectly with the path of recent sightings. Elias leaned closer, his breath shallow as he traced a finger along a ridge he knew well. The shaded region felt unsettlingly familiar, echoing the valley where he first saw the creature. Lionel explained that the mark referenced restricted territories from decades earlier, areas once used for research no one had fully documented. The realization settled over them like a chill. They weren't dealing with chance encounters. They were walking directly into a place someone had tried very hard to erase. The deeper Lionel dug into public archives, the more he uncovered a pattern of tragedies linked to the valley. Old newspaper clippings chronicled disappearances stretching back generations. Miners, travelers, families who ventured too far from the main roads. Each report was vague, always attributed to natural dangers or accidents, yet everyone mentioned the same area. Mara flipped through the pages with growing unease, sensing a deliberate effort to hide something more sinister beneath simple explanations. Elias felt a heaviness in his chest as he imagined the woods swallowing lives long before he arrived with his camera. Lionel grew quiet as he recognized familiar handwriting in the margins of one article, script he had seen in his grandfather's personal journals. A truth he had never wanted to face began to surface, and the past he thought he understood blurred into something darker. Mara found the note inside a rusted metal box hidden beneath a loose plank on the station floor. The paper was brittle, its handwriting jagged and hurried, as though written in panic. Lionel read the coded lines slowly, piecing together fractured phrases that hinted at something trapped, something altered, something never meant to leave the valley. Elias listened in stunned silence as Lionel explained the implications. Whoever wrote the note believed the creature was not an accident of nature, but the byproduct of a human design gone wrong. The symbols scattered across the page matched the carvings they'd found in the woods, confirming a link none of them could ignore. The room seemed to darken with the weight of this revelation. The truth was no longer hiding at the edges of the forest. It was reaching toward them, demanding to be uncovered. The surveillance cameras were placed high in the trees, angled downward to track movement across the narrow valley floor. Mara reviewed the footage frame by frame, her pulse quickening as she watched branches sway without wind and shadows stretch where no figure stood. Then something flickered, just a blur at the edge of the frame, moving in a straight line that ignored the natural obstacles of the forest. Elias leaned close, recognizing the eerie smoothness of the movement, the same unnatural glide I'd seen through his lens. Lionel shifted uneasily, sensing intent behind the blur, as though the creature knew the cameras were there and chose precisely what to reveal. Another flicker appeared, this time closer, crossing between two birches in less than a heartbeat. The forest had a heartbeat of its own, and the footage felt like a warning. Something was watching them from angles no camera could reach. Sophia led them to a quiet ridge, overlooking a wide stretch of forest, her expression carrying a heaviness she had kept buried for years. She spoke slowly, describing the night she encountered something she could never explain. A tall figure standing between the trees, too still, too aware. She admitted she had resigned herself to forgetting, telling no one for fear of losing both her job and her sanity. Mara listened closely, realizing Sophia's story matched Elias' sighting almost perfectly. Lionel felt a chill as he imagined how many similar encounters had been dismissed over the decades. Sophia's voice trembled when she described the figure's eyes, reflecting moonlight as though lit from within. The silence that followed her confession settled like dust in the wind. The woods below them looked deceptively calm, yet Sophia's memory made the valley feel smaller, as though something trapped them within its gaze. The echoes began as faint vibrations underfoot, subtle enough to pass as distant thunder. But as the team followed the sound, it resolved into something rhythmic, like a pattern hidden beneath the earth. Elias felt a growing pressure behind his ears, while Mara sensed the air shift with each pulse. The sound guided them to a clearing choked with tall grass, where the ground dipped into a shallow depression filled with old stones arranged in a broken circle. Lionel approached slowly, his breath catching as he recognized the formation from ancient burial diagrams. The stones bore shallow carvings, symbols that matched the note they had deciphered. Sophia stepped back, instinctively wary, as though the earth itself whispered of things better left undisturbed. The echo faded suddenly, leaving the clearing in complete, suffocating silence. It felt like interrupting a ritual meant to stay hidden forever. Inside the ranger station, Lionel spread the enhanced footage across multiple screens, each showing fragments of the creature's form with far more clarity than before. The face that emerged was unmistakably human, eyes filled with intelligence and an agonizing awareness. Mara stared in silence, wrestling with the conflict between what she'd assumed and what she now saw. Elias stepped closer, recognizing that faint, pleading expression he had witnessed through his lens. It wasn't the look of a predator. It was the look of something hiding from pain. Lionel identified subtle distortions around the creature's limbs, signs of altered structure that matched descriptions from the old manuscripts. The truth left them shaken. This being was not simply born of the forest. It had been shaped, changed, trapped in a body caught between worlds. The room fell still as each of them realized how deeply the past had scarred the present. They returned to the clearing near dusk, hoping to find more clues before night claimed the forest. The air felt unnaturally still, as if holding a breath too long. Mara scanned the tree line while Lionel inspected the soil around the stone formation. Elias lifted his camera slowly, instinct guiding him to focus on the darker edges of the woods. Then he froze. Another shape stood between the trees, taller than the first creature, broader, its posture more guarded. It didn't move, yet its presence pressed against the clearing like a rising tide. Sophia stepped forward but halted as the figure shifted its head toward them with a slow, deliberate motion that carried an unspoken warning. The first creature had been watching them. Now they realized it had not been alone. Whatever lived in these woods was not a single tragedy, but a lineage. The trail ended suddenly at the cliff's edge, as though the earth itself had swallowed every trace. Mara knelt at the precipice, brushing loose gravel aside as she searched for any sign of where the tracks continued. But the ground was clean, too clean. Elias peered over the ledge, feeling the drop pull at him like a quiet threat. The valley below stretched into mist, hiding whatever secrets it held. Lionel studied the last print, noticing how the soil beneath it seemed packed unnaturally tight, as though something had forced the ground to harden. Sophia walked the perimeter in slow circles, scanning the treetops as though expecting movement above, rather than below. The abrupt disappearance of the tracks felt intentional, almost practiced. If the creature had passed this way, it had done so with knowledge of the terrain far beyond human instinct. And for the first time, Mara wondered whether the cliff had been used before. They approached the old rope bridge with hesitation, sensing danger long before they saw the frayed cords. The wind pushed the structure gently, making it sway like a breath that didn't belong to the forest. Sophia tested the first board with her boot, only to hear a deep groan from the rotting planks. She stepped back immediately. Lionel scanned the opposite side of the gorge and spotted fresh markings, branches broken in a line leading toward a narrow trail. Elias lifted his camera, aiming to capture proof before they moved on. But the sound came first. A sharp snapping twang echoing across the gorge like a warning shot. The bridge sagged, then dropped, the center collapsing into the darkness below. Mara flinched as the final ropes gave way, the remnants swaying like torn limbs in the wind. They stood in stunned silence, realizing the collapse was not an accident. Something had triggered it. Recently, the iron smell reached them before the sight did. A dark stain soaked into the earth near the base of a fallen tree, its color deep and unmistakable. Mara approached cautiously, her breath tightening as she examined the edges of the pool. It hadn't dried completely. Whoever it belonged to had passed through recently. Elias swallowed hard, remembering the witness who vanished without a trace, and felt the dread settle deeper in his chest. Lionel crouched beside the stain, noting faint drag marks leading away from the tree, though they dissolved quickly into the surrounding brush. Sophia scanned the canopy, sensing eyes watching them from above or beyond. The quiet here felt heavy, as though the forest mourned something it could not speak of. The realization struck them in unspoken unison. This was no random victim. This was part of a pattern. And the next step in that pattern was already unfolding around them. The soil pattern appeared just beyond the bloodstain, a careful arrangement of sticks, stones, and leaves forming a ring with spiraling lines drawn through the center. Lionel recognized the design instantly, his breath catching as he realized it matched symbols recorded in the oldest manuscripts. Mara crouched beside him, tracing the spiral without touching it, sensing intention behind every line. Elias felt a prickling along his spine. The arrangement looked less like a clue and more like a message. Sophia backed away a step, instinct warning that such designs rarely served harmless purposes. Lionel explained that these patterns were used in early experimental grounds, marking zones where subjects were either released or observed. The forest seemed to lean closer as he spoke, as if hearing a familiar language. The message wasn't meant for them, but for something that still walked these woods. The survivor emerged from the shadows as if molded by the dusk itself, his clothing torn and his breathing shallow. Mara steadied him as he stumbled forward, eyes wide with terror. He insisted he hadn't been attacked, he had been helping it. His voice cracked as he explained that the creature wasn't hunting. It was protecting something hidden deeper in the valley. Elias listened with a chill running through him, recalling the pleading look the creature had given through his lens. Lionel questioned the man gently, but his answers came fragmented, as though fear had rearranged his thoughts. Sophia watched the tree line, sensing movement she couldn't yet see. The survivor's final confession shook them. He had seen a place underground, a structure not built by nature. Whatever lived in these woods had origins far beneath the surface, and it wasn't finished. The journal was wrapped in layers of cloth so old they crumbled at Lionel's touch. He opened it with the care of someone diffusing a fragile memory and began reading aloud. The entries were written in hurried strokes, each line steeped in fear and regret. The author described early experiments meant to push the limits of human endurance, experiments that blurred the borders between survival and cruelty. Mara listened with a tight jaw, while Elias felt each page weigh heavier than the last. The writer spoke of subjects who changed in ways their creators didn't foresee. Heightened senses, elongated bones, instincts bending violently towards self-preservation. And then the entries ended abruptly, the final words smeared as though written during a frantic escape. Lionel closed the journal slowly, dread filling the silence. These woods carried more than legends. They carried the aftermath of choices no one should have made. The lab report lay across the desk like a verdict. Sophia set it down gently, though her expression revealed the shock she felt. Lionel read each line with slow disbelief, tracing the impossible results. Elias stepped closer, unable to look away from the chart showing genetic sequences neither fully human nor animal. Mara swallowed, feeling the weight of what this meant. The creature wasn't a myth. It was a remnant of a forgotten experiment, altered in ways that defied every natural rule. The report detailed anomalies in muscle density, bone structure, and nerve alignment, hinting at a deliberate design meant to survive hostile terrain. Yet, woven into the data were unmistakable traces of human origin. Elias exhaled shakily, remembering the haunted eyes that had stared into his lens. The creature wasn't born a monster. It had been made into one. The entrance to the underground shelter was hidden beneath a thick layer of vines, the opening barely wide enough for a person to slip through. Mara felt the chill rising from below as they descended the narrow staircase carved into the earth. The air thickened, carrying the scent of rust and old water. Elias raised his flashlight, revealing walls lined with metal brackets and shattered jars. Lionel's breath caught when he saw faded labels, scientific markings he recognized from his grandfather's notes. Sophia watched the shadows carefully, sensing movement in the dark corners. The deeper they went, the more the tunnel felt like a grave for forgotten intentions. Then the space widened into a chamber, where rusted machines stood like ghosts of failed ambition. Everything here spoke of secrecy and fear. Whatever happened in this place had never been meant to see daylight again. A faint sound echoed through the chamber. Soft, uneven breaths drifting from the far wall. Mara motioned for silence as Elias lifted his light, revealing a shadowed alcove. The creature stepped into view, not charging or retreating, but standing with a strange, protective posture. Its trembling gaze shifted between the team and something behind it. Lionel saw the tension in its stance, the way it stood not like a predator, but like a guardian afraid to lose what remained. Sophia tightened her grip on her flashlight, uncertain whether danger or plea lay before them. Elias met the creature's eyes and felt that familiar pull, a silent request for understanding. The room pulsed with conflicting instincts, fear, curiosity, and a fragile thread of trust. Whatever was behind that creature mattered more to it than its own safety, and the creature seemed ready to defend it with everything it had left. The truth revealed itself slowly as Elias stepped closer, light trembling in his hand. Behind the creature lay a smaller form, curled into the shadows, a second being frail and frightened, its features bearing the same tragic traces of altered humanity. Mara's breath caught as she realized the creature wasn't guarding a secret weapon, but a wounded sibling. Lionel felt the weight of history pressing down as he recognized the implications. These weren't escaped subjects. They were survivors of an experiment abandoned by time. The creature glanced toward the smaller figure with a tenderness that shattered every assumption they had made. Sophia's stance softened, understanding dawning through her caution. The chamber felt suddenly alive with sorrow and clarity. The creature wasn't a threat. It was a shield, shaped by fear, but driven by something painfully human. The story of the valley had been rewritten in a single fragile moment. Dawn seeped into the valley like a reluctant truth, brushing pale light across the forest floor. Elias stepped toward the clearing where he had first seen the creature, every breath filled with the weight of what he now understood. The creature emerged slowly, carrying none of the menace he once imagined, its posture uncertain yet firm, seeking recognition, not confrontation. Mara and the others held back, sensing that this moment belonged to Elias alone. He raised his camera, but not to capture evidence. He lifted it the way someone lifts a hand in greeting, offering trust without words. The creature paused, its eyes reflecting a sadness that felt impossibly familiar. It wasn't the gaze of a monster. It was the gaze of something tired of being hunted, tired of hiding. The silence between them deepened, shaped by everything they had uncovered, and Elias knew the valley had chosen him for this final exchange. Lionel stepped forward, holding a single torn page from the journal, its ink smeared but legible enough to reshape everything they believed. The page described an early test, one subject who had escaped not by chance but by design, a subject whose instincts had been altered to protect the others. Lionel's voice shook as he explained that the creature Elias first saw was likely the original guardian, engineered to shield the younger ones from harm. Mara felt the revelation settle like a stone in her chest, Elias looked back at the creature, understanding now why it had stared into his lens with such familiar intensity. It hadn't been startled, it had been evaluating him, deciding whether he was threat or witness. The truth changed the memory of that morning entirely. He hadn't stumbled upon the creature. The creature had chosen to be found. The first plume of smoke curled upward almost silently, drifting from the far side of the valley before any of them noticed the glow behind the trees. Then the crackle of fire erupted, spreading with terrifying speed as flames leapt from trunk to trunk. Sophia shouted for them to move, recognizing how quickly the dry underbrush would carry the blaze. Elias hesitated, staring toward the underground shelter where the smaller creature remained hidden. Mara grabbed his arm, urging him towards safety, but the ground shook with the force of collapsing branches behind them. Lionel struggled to protect the journal pages from embers drifting through the air like falling sparks of memory. The fire grew into a wall of heat and sound, consuming the valley's secrets in minutes. And through the smoke, Elias felt a single truth burning brighter than the flames. They couldn't leave without knowing what the creature intended. Through the dense smoke, the creature stepped into the clearing, carrying the smaller one in its arms. Its movements were steady, purposeful, even as the flames roared around them. Mara froze, struck by the sight of a being born from cruelty, choosing compassion over survival. Elias watched in awe as the creature laid the younger one gently at the edge of the fire line, just beyond where the flames could reach. It turned toward the team, eyes filled with a complex blend of fear, determination, and something startlingly human. Lionel realized the creature wasn't fleeing the fire. It was giving the younger one a chance to live beyond the valley. Sophia lowered her guard completely, understanding this gesture for what it was: defiance against the fate forced upon them. The firelight flickered across the creature's face, revealing not a legend, but a choice. Elias lifted his camera again, not out of fear or duty, but because he felt the moment deserved to be witnessed. The creature stood framed by flames that licked the sky, its silhouette trembling yet resolute. It looked back at him, and the world seemed to hold still. The eyes that met his carried every truth they had struggled to uncover. The experiments, the suffering, the years of hiding, the quiet acts of protection. Elias felt something shift inside him, a recognition that went deeper than fear. This being wasn't a monster. It was the last survivor of a story written by human hands and buried by time. The creature took a single step backward, swallowed slowly by smoke and shadow. Elias pressed the shutter one final time. The valley exhaled, and the lens captured a look that would follow him for the rest of his life.